Hello, everyone. We're very excited today. Welcome to Scripps Research Fully Interactive Resources for Students and Teachers, or FIRST. My name is Rosie Alvaran-Steckler, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. We're very excited again because this is our very first, not to be confusing, but our very first event of this new initiative that we named FIRST. And this whole idea came about, unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. We normally support our community of educators in person by going to schools and so on. And we were thinking what we can do for our educators and their students. As you know, COVID-19 has impacted everyone's lives, including the way that you attend school and take classes or teach classes. And we are developing these webinars and other resources that, again, we adopt first for, to close the gap between scientists and educators and students. And we will be telling you more about this initiative at the end. Today, for today's presentation, we have a panel composed of 2 grad students and a postdoc. So Mr. Vincent van der Poel and Ms. Paige Dixon, who's going to join us soon. They're both grad students, and Dr. Madeline Cavanaugh, she's a postdoctoral fellow. And we can move on to our panelists. I'm going to ask them to start by giving a 1 to 2 minute intro of themselves, and we can do this in this order. So first Vincent, and then Paige, and then Madeline.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Vincent van der Poel. I'll start by saying that I was a community college student at Palomar College. So I'm a local boy. I grew up here. I went to college here, started at a community college, and then I transferred to the University of California at San Diego to complete my education. From there, I moved across the street to pursue my PhD in chemistry at Scripps Research. I guess I could add a fun fact. What do I like to do in my free time? I like to play card games with my friends. Welcome.
Great. Paige?
Hello, everyone. I am a 5th-year PhD student, actually at the Florida campus of Scripps Research. I'm also in the chemistry department, but my research is focused on studying science at the microscopic level to understand how we can use chemistry to treat disease. So in my research, I'm identifying and studying new chemical entities that have the ability to kill cancer cells, which could be used as the basis for medicines in the future. I got interested in science in high school and pursued a chemistry major in my undergraduate. And in the future, I hope to merge my interest in scientific research and education after I finish my PhD. And in my free time, I love to cook, play with my cats, and listen to music and travel.
Thank you. Madeline?
Hi, I'm Madeline. I am a postdoc in Ben Cravat's lab here at Scripps Research in California. As you might hear, I'm actually Australian, and one of the greatest things that I found about science is that it gives you that opportunity to really travel. So I did my undergraduate degree in Australia, and then I did a exchange in Sweden for a year. I then did a PhD in England, and now I'm here in California doing what's called a postdoc. So a postdoc is just a period of mentored research after you've completed your PhD, and it's an additional period of training that you often need to do if you want to get a faculty position at a university or if you want to go into industry. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. My research interest is really to develop new ways to control how our immune system functions and to treat disease. So I'm doing this through using a combination of chemistry and biology and analytical techniques like mass spectrometry. And my current project is really focused on understanding how particular interactions between proteins control how the cell functions, and then developing drug-like chemicals that could interrupt those protein interactions. And hopefully we could use those to modulate how our immune system's working. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you. Thank you. So I know that you touched briefly on these and how you first started on your research journey, but if you can talk more about it, if it was middle school, high school, college, how you really got initiated in research, and then what, if you can think of anything, what is particular to your journey compared to other people? And again, we'll go Vincent, Paige, and Madeline.
Well, I suppose I've kind of always been interested in science. Probably the earliest experience was in middle school when I asked a teacher to give me private lessons on in chemistry. So I kind of, right from the start of getting interested in science, I think I kind of predestined myself to go into chemistry. But I think a particularly unique point about my journey in science is that I did go to community college. There aren't there aren't many people in our graduate program, for example, that have gone to community college. And I think that clearly is an indication that it's something unique about me. Can you repeat the second part of the question? Sorry, Rosie.
No, I wanted to know more about how you got first interested in research, how your journey began.
Okay, got it. So in terms of research, I did go to community college, so there weren't any opportunities at the community college level to go into research. So I kind of had to wait until I actually transferred to UCSD to find an opportunity. And it took me a year to find a lab to kind of settle in and get started with. I think the challenge, or the reason it took longer, is just because I was a transfer student, a commuting student. So I didn't really have a lot of time to build relationships with professors. I was able to build a good relationship with professor, and he helped me a lot in finding a research opportunity and applying to a summer research internship program at Scripps Research. And because Scripps Research is extremely close to UCSD, I was able to continue my work in the following academic year. That is my final senior year.
That's great. That tells the students that it's never late to get started in research.
Exactly. Right, exactly.
So, Paige, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story?
Definitely. So I grew up kind of always surrounded by the concept of medicine and science. Both of my parents are medical professionals. And I really got interested in the idea of research when I was in high school, when I started taking science classes like biology and chemistry, where we got the opportunity to do lab activities, really hands-on answering questions using scientific methods and trying to kind of understand the theory that I was learning within the textbooks. And so one kind of unique thing I would say about my journey was that in my senior year of high school, I had taken all of the chemistry classes that were offered. And so I ended up doing kind of an independent study project where I was developing new lab activities for the classes I had already taken. So it's kind of my first experience in developing protocols and really set the basis for me doing research in college.
Great. And Madeline?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people in science, I was always a very, very just inquisitive, curious sort of person who loved learning and just wanted to know everything about everything, and also had a really keen interest in the natural world. So that was just sort of like my personality. But in terms of like science and science research, I actually didn't really enjoy science classes at school. I thought they were pretty boring. The answers were all in the textbooks. The labs were, again, weighing out stupid things which didn't seem to make any sense to me. It seemed like a waste of time. Like wasn't very passionate about my science classes the way they were taught. What really got me into science was when I got to do those independent projects. There are a couple of times during school and during undergrad when I went and either applied for internships or entered sort of research-based science competitions. And at that point, it was much more exciting to me because it was everything about the scientific process that I found to be exciting and a challenge. I got to work on a project or an idea that I found really, really interesting. I got to think about what I really wanted to know about it. I then had to have this big challenge of designing an experiment that I could actually use to test my hypothesis about that. And then I did the experiment, and that's sometimes fun and sometimes it's not, but then you get back all this data and that's really exciting. You get to interpret that, and it's this really iterative process of sort of like design, test, analyze and redesign. And it seems like much more of a game and a way of life to me, and that is sort of what I enjoy about science. So it wasn't until I sort of got to start working on my own things, my own ideas, that I really realized what science is and why I really enjoy it. And then I was able to, as I moved through sort of like undergraduate and started learning more about human biology and chemistry and sort of most of my research has been on sort of antibiotic resistance and drug development for bacterial infections. And it wasn't until I sort of started to integrate that with my passion for actually the scientific process that everything sort of came together, and I really knew that I wanted to do a PhD and then move on and have my own sort of research group in the future.
That's great. Yeah, and thank you for bringing the topic of internships. I know that many of the high school students out there, that are watching us, they might be really enthusiastic about science, but they don't know how to start. And I know, Paige, that you feel very strongly about internships as well. Do you want to give them an advice on how to get started in science?
Definitely. So I was very lucky in college. I had the opportunity to do an internship that Rosie mentioned at a pharmaceutical company called Bristol Myers Squibb. And they are a national company who's been involved in developing a lot of drugs that most people are familiar with. And so that research experience was what made me realize how excited I was about science and doing research and answering questions using experimental techniques. And what I would, my advice for all of you, if you're in high school, talk to your science teachers about summer and after school opportunities for your interests. There are a lot of local programs that are available. I know at Scripps, both in California and in Florida, there's a high school summer internship program that you can apply to. And if you're an undergraduate, talk to your professors whose research interests you and see if those are possibilities. They also may not have space in their labs, but they may have other suggestions for avenues to pursue. So I'd say talk to people who are working in science, and they'll probably be able to give you really good ideas of what's available in your local area.
Great, thank you. So Madeline, I know from your bio that you've been in different countries, that you have done research in different countries, and I know you wanted to talk to our audience about what science can bring you in terms of diversity and visiting different countries. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's definitely been one of the greatest things about working in science and this particular journey is the fact that it's given me so many opportunities to travel and meet new people and work in different areas. Science really is a completely global discipline, and so not only is it given me the opportunity to work in different places, but just the different life experiences. I think it's really good for broadening your perspective on life, and it's just been wonderful. So as I've mentioned, like I did my high school and my undergraduate studies in Australia, and then moved, so during my undergrad, I spent a year of that in Sweden, and that was absolutely incredible, getting to live in, Scandinavia and riding a bike to school every day in the snow was just completely different and changes your way of thinking about cold forever. And then going to the UK and getting to work in Cambridge was incredible. I mean, everything there was built in, the 12 or 1400. So it's just amazing. Like that sense of history and culture is completely different to anything that you can get in Australia or even in America, where everything's so new and modern. And then moving over to California, well, I mean, it's pretty hard place to be. And yeah, I think that science is really one of those disciplines where the jobs and the study can be performed in any country, in any language, and it gives you this universal ability to have something in common with people all over the world, and it really is a global community, either online or in person. It's definitely one of the greatest things about it.
Awesome. Yeah, and then Vincent, I wanted to pick up on something you said about you went to a community college, and maybe some of our audience, the high schoolers, some of them already might have lay out their plan and they want to go to medical school and everything, but others, they might not know. They know that they love science. So how did you transition from high school to community college to then to 4-year college and then the PhD?
Right. So I guess part of answering that question is maybe why community college. I mean, I was always interested in science, but I wasn't a great student when I first started high school. So I didn't have the track record that I felt to get into a 4-year university, or at least not somewhere that I wanted to go. And so I chose to go to community college to save some money and try and become a better student. I was successful because I got into all the schools that I applied to. So high school to community college was definitely still a huge step. You still have to learn more independently, but the key difference between community college and a four-year university that I found was the smaller class sizes and the community college level. And that allowed for a more personal relationship with my professors. So I still keep in touch with my community college professors for letters of recommendation or even for events or various outreach events. But in any case, the biggest transition and the step from community college to the four-year university was even more independence. The class sizes were a lot larger. There wasn't as much access to the professors. So it felt like it was really on me to learn everything that we covered in class. There wasn't so much someone carrying us through with a bunch of assignments to learn material. There were a few assignments and tests that counted for everything. So that was the major transition that I had to shift my thinking in that respect and my studying when I went from community college to a four-year university.
That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I hope that the students out there are seeing like the different paths that you can take to kind of like same end in terms of the PhD. But then what is next after PhD? Maybe we'll start with Madeline because she already went through these. So is it hard to get another job or the first job? And what kind of options are out there? Then maybe after Madeline, we could go to Paige and then Vincent.
Yeah, so for me personally, it wasn't difficult to get a job. It was difficult to choose a job and to choose which path I really wanted to focus on. I think with a PhD, the opportunities are endless. Whether or not you plan to stay in research itself and move on and be sort of a professor or work in industry, there are boundless opportunities there, and it's really about deciding which area of research you want to focus on, how you're going to fund that, what sort of fellowship you're going to get, where you're going to live, because you're probably going to be moving from where you did your graduate, your PhD, to somewhere else. So it's not a lack of opportunities. It's really at that point, once you've finished your PhD, you're suddenly entering the real world, leaving school for the first time, and you have to sort of know yourself and make that decision about where to go. If you're not planning on sort of staying in research, again, there are just a huge number of opportunities available there for people with a PhD. A lot of people that I studied with didn't pursue research. They moved on and they're now high school teachers or community college teachers. Some of them have gone into journalism. Others that I did my PhD with have moved on to patent law. There are others who are now doing completely different things. They've moved into physical education and sort of like personal training. It's having a degree, particularly a degree in science and fundamental sciences like chemistry or biochemistry, can set you up for a huge number of different opportunities. And obviously actually probably 50% of the people that I studied with have actually gone on and now done further, they're being medical doctors, so combining their research passion with sort of a medical degree as well. So opportunities really are endless, I think.
Very interesting. So Paige, where are you looking for your next step?
Yes, so I am in my 5th year of my PhD, as I mentioned, which is the time when I'm writing up my thesis and all of the results from the experiments I've done over the past 5 years, and am ready to defend my research and think about the next step. And so, you know, as Madeline mentioned, there are several paths you can pursue if you want to stay in research, either asking your own scientific questions as an academic professor, or working in what we call industry, which are private or nonprofit companies that can still do research, but for various different purposes, whether that is for studying human health and disease, or whether it's for studying the development of, say, new energy pathways and developing new environmental techniques and a variety of other different fields of science. I personally am planning to leave research, and I would like to incorporate the experience that I've gained in my PhD with some of my kind of education experience. I mean, hopefully I will get into a role where I'm not teaching in the classroom, but I'm developing kind of the science programming for K through 12 students. And what I would like to say is that a PhD, while you are doing research in a lab for 5 years, I'd like to think that it's not only a degree in that technical training, but it's also a degree in thinking and solving problems and how to ask questions and get meaningful answers out of them. And that kind of focus can be applied to everything inside and outside of the lab.
That's great. And Vincent?
Well, I'm only a second year, so my plans after my PhD are kind of they're still being developed, but I am pretty certain that I want to do some job in industry, which would involve taking what I have learned and the skills that I've developed in thinking and problem solving and applying it to either drug design and development or agrochemical development or something in that kind of field. One of the key areas that's most appealing to me is medicinal chemistry. That is the design of molecules to test for biological activity in drug discovery efforts. I suppose the appeal to that is primarily the actual act of making things. That's kind of one of the main things that got me interested in chemistry, is just being able to take two things and make something completely new. And there's still some investigative requirements and problem solving required of that. For example, you need to figure out if what you made is what you expected. You need to ensure that whatever you made is pure. And then if you want to go from point A to point B, you need to figure out what pathway you want to take to go from one molecule to another. So that's kind of the career path that I'm interested in now. But like I said, I am kind of early at this point. It's kind of early in my PhD, and I'm not going up for job talks right now. So I'm not too worried about what am I going to do right now, to be honest. But that's, like I said, that's kind of the field that's most appealing.
Great. Yeah.
What I will say,
yes, go ahead.
To add one more thing, much like there are research internships for high school students and undergraduates, for PhD students, there are also kind of internships in the alternative tracks outside of research. So whether that is becoming a patent lawyer or getting involved in the business of science, there are a variety of internships even at the PhD level. So you'll never stop having these training opportunities.
Right. So I hope to take advantage of those at some point as well. Thank you.
That's true. Thank you for that. So this is a great question here. Do you need to get a master's degree before getting a PhD? So Madeline, do you want to take this one?
That's going to depend on what country you're in. I'm probably not actually the best person to answer this because not being American. My understanding of the American system is that you do not need a master's, that you move straight from your undergraduate to your PhD. If you were living in Germany, you would definitely need to get a master's before doing a PhD. For me, as an Australian, we have sort of a hybrid system where you do 3 years of undergraduate coursework and labs. You then do a 4th year, which is 100% research. So you spend 12 months in a research lab doing a project, and that is sort of like a 1-year master's, and after that you're allowed to do a PhD. So no, you don't need a master's, but if you move to Europe, you might.
You might. Okay, that's good. Let's see the next one. For your current projects, how did you come up with your ideas? This is a really good question. Did the lab give you the project, or you had to bring the idea to your faculty advisor? Maybe Paige wants to take this one?
So I would say it's very different from lab to lab, and each advisor and principal investigator or PI has a very different way of training his or her students. So oftentimes the lab will have a research focus, so in a particular very specific area of science. For example, my lab's research is focused on finding molecules that will affect different disease areas. And so when I started in my lab, my PI gave me a list of maybe 10 possible projects to pursue and different kind of scientific questions I could answer. And from that list, I was able to kind of choose the ones that most interested me and did my own research on them and came up with more questions and ways to answer those questions. So it was kind of a team effort. And I'll say as you move further in your training and you become a more senior member of the lab, either as an older graduate student like myself or like Madeline, a postdoc, you have a lot more independence in your research and you can really start asking questions that are more specific to your interests. But what I will say is that science costs money, and that money often comes from different funding agencies, such as the National Institute of Health. And so each of our PIs has gotten money from these different funding agencies to operate their labs. So we do have to stay within kind of the scope of interest that our PIs have, but there are different levels of independence that we can each take on our project.
Great. Anybody else wants to add something to that?
Yeah, so I've now worked in a number of different labs and under a lot of different PIs, and I 100% agree with absolutely everything that Paige said. It's very lab dependent and career stage dependent. So from my different experiences, I was really, really lucky that at each stage I've had, my boss has given me a lot of freedom. When I was doing my sort of undergraduate research year, I was working in a neuropharmacology lab. So we did medicinal chemistry, we made drugs, but they were for any disease related to the brain. And when I came into that lab, just finishing my undergrad, my boss said, you can do any project as long as it's related to the brain, come up with an idea. And I just read so much. So one of the questions was, how do you come up with these ideas? You read and read and read and read and read as much literature as you can, and something will just spark your interest, and you will go, oh, that's interesting, and what don't they know about that? And so it's a lot about reading and finding out what's unknown and what makes you passionate. And then when I moved on to my PhD, I was really interested in focusing on infectious diseases at that point and learning some different techniques. So the project that I worked on had already been established in the lab by a previous PhD student who was working on one particular protein, and I was able to use the techniques in that lab and the techniques, or the sort of use the research area that they had kind of been working on to then expand out into a whole range of other fields. So that was much more of a building on a project that was already existing in the lab. And then when you graduate from your PhD, at that point, it does become very, very important to come up with your own ideas. And again, it has to fit in with whatever lab you're going to go work in wants to do. But for me, I'm funded by a charity in the UK called the Wellcome Trust. And the fellowship that I'm funded by wants people to pursue research in a biomedical field that can be on any topic. So at that point, I again had to do a lot of reading, really decide about what areas of science I cared about, where I felt I could make a difference, and come up with sort of my own independent ideas. And then I had to look for labs that were going to be able to offer me the resources and the techniques to be able to support that. And so that's how I've come to be working at Scripps, that I had a particular idea about a particular aspect of biology that I think we can really exploit to be able to manipulate how our immune system works. And then the Cravat Lab has got all of the scientific expertise and techniques for me to be able to work on that particular problem. So in summary, how do you come up with your ideas? You read a lot, you find what interests you, and then you find the funding sources and the labs that are going to be able to support that, I think.
Great. I want to move along because we're getting a lot of questions. And so I have a question here for Vincent that I think it's very interesting. So the high schoolers out there don't understand why the difference in industry. So you spoke about a job in industry, and they don't, no, that's fine. So now it's an opportunity to explain the differences between academia and industry jobs.
Well, an academic job is going to revolve a lot around not only doing research. I think oftentimes a key difference you'll find is that in academic labs, in an academic job, you're going to do more fundamental asking of questions. And another big part of academic jobs is training new scientists, and depending on what university or research institution that you go to could involve teaching as well. For example, teaching undergraduates or graduate students. In contrast, industry, they're interested in making money through the design of new drugs to treat diseases. So the problems that they are facing are almost are almost practical, or problems that they address are practical and really current and really focused on what kind, like whatever drug that they're designing or whatever process that is, whatever industrial process that they're developing. So that's the key difference between an academic and an industry job. In academia, you're focused more on fundamental research, whereas in industry, you're more interested in research that is going to have an immediate impact. Now, that's not to say that there isn't academic research like that Paige does that can find immediate impact. Just when you look at the general fields, that's the basic classification.
Okay, and so we have another question. I guess it's a segue like that. If you think that you ever see the benefit of your research in the public, and I guess, with, talking about industry and academia, there's industry, maybe you think that is going to be more impactful to the public, but maybe not. So anybody want to take up on this question?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I will say that that benefit to the public can come in many different ways. For example, especially in light of the coronavirus outbreak right now, there have been researchers at Scripps who have been studying this class of virus for 15 years now. And just recently now, all of that work they've done and all the findings that they've made have had this impact on the public in the sense that it has helped to guide the actions and the reactions to this viral outbreak. So I will say, as biomedical researchers, oftentimes it takes 10 or 15 years for the effort that we're putting in to really come to fruition, but it definitely still happens. So when I was in undergrad, I did an internship at Bristol Myers Squibb, which I mentioned, which does drug discovery research. So some of the kind of aspects of the project I was working on then are finally now possibly going into clinical trials or actually being tested in humans. So I would say it's a very long process, and it's not an instant gratification experience or career, but that's what makes it even more rewarding when all of that effort comes to be something important for human health or whatever we're doing research on.
Yeah, I'll just.
And if I could, oh, sorry. Please, Madeline, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just put in a bit of a comment about the difference between academia and industry based on my experience. So I have limited experience of industry. I've worked on sort of an industry collaborative project before, and my general impression is that the type of job that you get in industry will differ a lot depending on whether you're working for a small sort of biotech startup sort of company, or if you're working for a very large multinational sort of company. The differences that I saw was that in industry, you could be a member of a very, very large team. Your role tended to be much more defined. You'd be doing sort of one job. It would be a little bit more repetitive. There'd be a little bit more hierarchical stuff within the organization. There were a lot more meetings and regulations, and all of that was there to increase efficiency and to make sure that you really got from, again, working in drug development, getting from that initial potential drug-like compound and towards the market as quickly as possible. There was a lot of money turnover. It was very rapid. There was a lot of people, a lot of collaboration, but your individual, or the impact of your individual role, I felt was a little bit smaller because you were working in such a collaborative environment versus the academic environment, which I'm more interested in pursuing, is where you might be sort of the head of or working in a relatively smaller team. You probably are going to have less resources, but you also have a lot more freedom. You're going to get funding from different bodies, and that's probably going to tell you that you have to work on cancer in general, or you have to work on specific fields. But I think there's a lot more freedom in terms of what you research. And there's a little bit more self-control. I mean, that may mean that you don't get to an answer as quickly as possible. As Vincent said, sometimes you're working on more fundamental problems, but all of those fundamental scientific questions are there to support the translation in the end. And I certainly know a lot of academic labs that work on very, very translational work, drugs that have gone to market, that have entered the public, a lot of academic labs have spin-off companies associated with them. So my boss has got at least 3 different spin-off companies which have come out of academic projects and now are doing industry type work and making a big impact that way. But it's mostly about the day-to-day work structure that I thought was different between academia and industry.
Vincent, you wanted to add something to that?
Right. This was just to address how your research impacts the public. In academia, I feel like the research is, and this is always important too, is that even, well, this I think goes for both industry and academia, is that research is really incremental and it happens in baby steps. For example, my project is informed by 40 years of research, but it could find immediate impact, immediate application when the project is done. But it took 40 years of research to get to this point. So no, the vast majority of science that's published in the journals that we read doesn't make it to the news outlets, the mass media news outlets. Most research that's funded happens in small steps.
That's great. Thank you for mentioning that. And that could be another webinar, another topic for another webinar as a whole, because it's important to understand how long and difficult it takes and how difficult it is to create new drugs and to get them to the market. I know that we have a few students asking, as a high schooler, how can they get research experience? Maybe Paige, you want to answer this question?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned earlier, I would say wherever you are, maybe you can talk to your teachers, specifically your science teachers, or whatever subjects are interesting to you, and ask if they know of any internships. The other thing is to look into different businesses and universities in your local area and look to see what research labs are available and contact professors that way. So I would suggest, doing a lot of research online, do due diligence about what is available in your area. There may also be specific resources for high schoolers who are interested in science. I know for undergraduates, there are definitely those types of online resources. And, like I mentioned, Scripps in California and Florida both have summer internship programs, which will give you a really hands-on experience, which I think is very important towards understanding exactly what being a researcher is like in the day-to-day. Because reading science textbooks is nothing like actually asking scientific questions in the laboratory.
Right, and then it's important to know that you will get mentors, exactly how our panelists are. They will, you will work on one of their projects and they will guide you through the process, which I think it's a pretty unique experience if you come to do the internship in Scripps. Yeah, go ahead.
To add on to that, Rosie, we talked a lot about the concept of an independent project or designing your own project in your PhD and your postdoc. And please, as high schoolers and undergraduates, do not be intimidated if you feel like you wouldn't be able to do that right now, because in your internship experiences, part of that training will be learning how to ask those questions or how to read a paper or read a piece of scientific literature and think about what the next step could be. So you will really get a gamut of training, from the technical, how to do an experiment, also to how to think about experiments and analyze experiments. And I know there were some questions in the chat about how we learn how to analyze experiments or design an experiment. And a lot of that comes from mentors and senior experienced professionals, whether they're postdocs or older grad students in the lab. So there are a lot of training mechanisms that take place, not only doing technical work, but also thinking about the science as well.
Great, yeah, thank you for addressing that question. So another question, maybe Madeline, you want to take on this one. How do you create the relationship with your professors, with your mentors?
Yeah, so again, like all personal relationships, it differs with each one of them. But for the different PIs that I ended up working with, in every case, it started off with writing that letter of introduction. And my biggest sort of advice for writing that letter of introduction, that email, when you're emailing them to make contact for the first time, is show that you're passionate about science, show that you have actually read their science, and mention specific things about their research that interests you. It's great if you could, if you can read some of their papers and think about what questions that actually brings up to you. If you can go, oh, I thought this bit was really interesting, that might be something I'd want to work on, even if that's not what the professor wants to work on anymore, or not what they, you end up doing. The fact that you can demonstrate that you actually are interested, you're not just writing a letter to everyone, and that you can come up with your own independent ideas, even if, they may not be a good idea. The fact that you've gone through that process of thinking about it and shown that initiative always comes across as quite impressive. So I think that, yeah, definitely, you're probably gonna have to write a letter to someone. You need to show that you actually are passionate about the science, say why you're passionate. If you can show some initiatives, show some ideas, that's really, really good. And then when you actually get into the lab and need to build that relationship, it's a lot about keeping in contact. And I think that it can be really challenging as a graduate student and as a postdoc to keep in contact with your professor, because sometimes you feel like, oh, I haven't got the results, or I didn't get the right result, or I'm a bit nervous about it. And my advice there would be about to build that relationship is just keep the dialogue going, mention the problems you're having, mention the way you're trying to fix it, and just make sure you keep talking about it, because your professor is always there and wants to help and has a huge amount of knowledge to help. But if they don't know that you're having a problem, or they don't know that there is a problem, then they can't do anything about it. So I think it's definitely all about communication and just making sure that, yeah, you do keep in contact and don't give in to that feeling of, oh, I didn't get the right result, or I'm scared, or this is not going well, or I'm failing and my professor's going to hate me and kick me off the project. It's definitely about, everyone understands that you fail in science, or experiments don't go as you expect. And that's just science. And I think that that's a really big aspect of doing science and personal growth as well, is just realizing that things are not going to work out, and no matter what, you should take that result or that outcome and try and learn something from it, and maybe just ask a better question next time, or there's always something that you can learn out of whatever's happened, I think, if that answers the question at all.
Yes, that's great advice, and I think it's a good way kind of ending this, because I'm keeping an eye on the time and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I want everybody to know that we're gonna take the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer live, and we're gonna answer them and post them on the website. And we're asking everybody that once the webinar ends, a survey is gonna show on your screen. So if you can kindly take that survey and let us know how we did. It's actually 2 surveys. So there's gonna be a poll and then an actual survey from SurveyMonkey. And we kindly ask that you take both. Also, I wanted to let you know that we're going to continue with these webinars. So the next one is this Thursday. We're gonna feature grad student Elena Vasquez. She's gonna be showing a science demonstration of color changing cabbage. So you don't want to miss that. And then we're gonna have another panel next Tuesday. And once you take the survey, I think that's gonna take you to the webpage that has all the information on future webinars. And I know that many of your students and your teachers gave you the information. So we're in contact with your teachers. We're gonna keep communicating with them all the information about these webinars, and we hope to see you at those webinars as well. All of them are going to be live, and you're going to have an opportunity to interact with more scientists. And also feel free to offer or suggest new topics that you want to hear about. I think with that, maybe we can finish with one quick question, a fun question. So what do you guys do for fun? And Vincent, Paige, and Madeline.
Okay, so I play this card game called Magic the Gathering with my friends. I keep in contact with friends from high school, and we get together quite often. Sometimes it's every night of the week. When I leave the lab at like 7, 8 o'clock, I go to their house and we play this card game. until whenever, and then I go to sleep and wake up. No matter how much, it doesn't matter how much sleep I'm losing. If they invite me over to play this game, I need it because I need that stress relief, and I need to have fun during the week. I can't save it all for the weekend.
Good. Paige?
I'm very lucky to live in Florida, where it's sunny almost all the time, and we live 10 minutes from the beach. So I spend a lot of time outdoors. Not right now, of course, but I love to explore nature. And when the weather's not really amenable to that, I have 2 cats who I love to play with as well. And I think, like most scientists who like to follow protocols, I also love cooking, because cooking is very much like science in terms of following recipes and doing experiments.
And Madeline?
Yeah, to get out of the lab, I just love to get outdoors. I love hiking, camping, and just get active. So any sort of sport is, any sort of sport basically, but I particularly like Taekwondo, I like dance, and then also nature. So I come from a big sort of nature family, like bird watching, like basically anything outdoors is and active is fantastic, I think.
I hope that you enjoyed this first panel and that you join us for future ones. I really want to thank our panelists. You're great, and it was awesome to hear your advice. I'm sure that these students are going to pick on some of this advice for their future careers. And we're very grateful of your generosity with your time to join us today. We'll see you next time.